I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of not living. And nothing in life worth doing will ever be easy. You've got to understand that from the start. Yes, I've lost people in lives. Yes, I lost my wife. Yes, people died around me. Yes, I had to cut off my own fingers in the tent. But that hardship that I go through is very little to pay for what life has brought into our family and into my life. And that is when exploration becomes amazing. The possibility to always grow and always learn as you go along. If your dreams don't scare you, they're too small. You've got to be able to overcome your fears. And the moment you overcome your fear and something fascinates your mind, that is when the impossible no longer exists.
Hi, Mike. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for making the time.
Well, it's a pleasure, Eric. Thanks for inviting me.
Cold and eternal ice, a frozen wasteland, and infinite hardships. This is how one could describe the Arctic if one was maybe not very fond of it, and probably would be telling the truth, but probably also not doing it quite justice as far as you are concerned. How would you describe the Arctic?
The Arctic to me, as I spend quite a lot of time in the polar regions, the Arctic to me is an ocean. Mm-hmm. And this ocean allows us to have access to places that not a lot of people can go because it's ice floating on top of water. And as soon as you take ice floating on top of water, that's where the animals have to adapt to be able to survive in those extreme regions of the world. And to me, the Arctic or the polar ocean means 24-hour darkness as well, some of the most harshest places on Earth. And at the same time, 24 hours of light when the light comes above the equator and shines onto the polar ocean, where you can really see the life of the animals change in the way that between the dark and the night. And that contrast to me is what makes the polar ocean or the Arctic one of the most fascinating places on Earth.
And just a very quick remark in between. Would it be possible to reduce the noise in the background a little bit? Because it's pretty loud in the microphone.
Can you just stop cooking for a while? Or just stop making noise?
One of the above.
No.
I don't want to keep you from a meal, of course. But
No problem.
Yeah, I'm asking this because one of your more recent expeditions, of course, in the end of 2019, you traversed the Arctic Ocean via the North Pole in 87 days. And you believed already in advance that this would be one of the most difficult expeditions in your life. Why did you have this kind of feeling about that?
Once you start polar exploration, you can't stay away from it. Mm-hmm. And in 2006, with Borgi Ausland, when we left from Russia and did the first ever winter expedition to the North Pole, we left Russia from the land and then basically traveled over the sea ice for a period of 60 days to see the sun rise above the equator when we arrived on the North Pole. At that stage in 2006, we thought that that was the most difficult thing that I have done and that Borgi, being a polar explorer, has done in his life. And we thought that it was impossible to cross the polar ocean during the Arctic winter when you have 24-hour darkness. And through time, we kind of forget the hardship and we remember the most amazing moments we spent on the polar ocean, seeing the polar bears come to us, the ice moving, that complete darkness of that remote place in the world, kind of draws you back to it. And when you forget about the hardship, and you've increased your experience a little bit, that is when you feel like you want to go back. You need to do something better. You need to be able to see if humanly it's possible to cross the polar ocean. And after the crossing of Antarctica that I did in 2016 and 2017, where I sailed to Antarctica and I left the boat and then traveled a distance of 5,100 kilometers via the South Pole right across Antarctica, I had better knowledge of myself. I had better knowledge of equipment. And that is when we start thinking completely differently. And that's when I called Borgie Ausland again, and I asked him if
you also had forgotten about all the hardships, right?
If he forgot about the hardship, and you know, we even both mentioned it in 2006 that to cross the polar ocean during winter will be impossible. And, you know, as we grow older, a little bit more experienced, we forget about that hardship and go into the excitement of the polar ocean and exploration. And I built a boat. So I built a boat that could take me up into the polar ocean to make this dream basically come true, because we wanted to use a sailboat. We wanted to be like the old explorers that sailed into there, leave their boat, and kind of travel over the top of the world to an ice edge, not to a continent, to where the ice stops. And then to be able to have the boat pick us up on the other side, kind of fascinated our minds. And that is when we kind of said, if somebody can do it, we can do it, because we've got the boat, we've got the knowledge. We're still the only ones to reach the North Pole in complete darkness without resupply. Let's try and do this. So that's the fascination of human beings, always trying to dream bigger, trying to do more, trying to learn from each other. And then if you find a perfect partnership and if you find the perfect equipment, it's just the fear of leaving home that stops you from going. And because, you know, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of not living. That allows a mindset to make you understand that things become possible. And if I can be convinced in my mind, although it's never been done before, that it would be possible, that's when other people starts believing in me and my project. And the moment that you surround yourself with people through your conviction that believes it's possible, although it's never been done before, that is when you create this dynamic. And this dynamic is important in life. For anything that we do, we need support, we need knowledge, and then you've got to be able to overcome your fears. And the moment you overcome your fear and something fascinates your mind, that is when the impossible no longer exists.
Was there any particular moment on that expedition when you did remember the hardships from previous projects, when you were like, oh, okay, damn it, that is what it was like. Now I feel it again.
You know, that the moment that you leave your boat, you in the middle of the ocean. Okay, there's ice around you. The moment you leave that secure base, that's what we call the Rubicon, that point of no return. Everything's unknown. What's going to happen in 90 days, you can't predict. And the only thing that you can rely on is what you've lived and what you've experienced. So hardship is always there in our mind, but hardship doesn't allow us to say, no, we're not going to try and do this. It is something that we understand. And when you can make fear your home, you know, where you live in constantly with the fear, where you know that fatigue is something that you've experienced in previous expeditions, when you know that you can push your limit so far, that is when you can start taking calculated risks. So if there's no hardship, there's no amazing friendships that's being created. And nothing in life worth doing will ever be easy. You've got to understand that from the start. So to be able to know that, yes, you are going to freeze your fingers. Yes, you are going to be hungry. Yes, you're going to be afraid to get out of that tent. Yes, there is polar bears that can eat you. Yes, the ice can crack and you can disappear. That is not enough reason not to try. That is reasons that we accept. And the moment that you take that step over that Rubicon, that point of no return, that you can never come back, the only option is now you've got to count on yourself, your equipment, your partner to make this dream come true. And hardship is eventually what pushes us to go there. And that hardship is what is the unknown. How are you going to mentally deal with being uncomfortable for more than 3 months?
Yes, uncomfortable. Then, of course, there are physical hardships, but there's also this monotony, meaning it's, of course, dark all the time.
Yeah.
You did this in winter, as we have said. What was your mindset like and your self-talk during these days? Because, of course, if we talk about it like this in a very summed up version right now, it's a big adventure. But while doing it, I suppose it's also a lot of very, very dark hours where not a lot of obvious, exciting stuff is happening, but it's still very, very hard all the time. How do you try and manage to keep yourself motivated and committed and hopefully also happy to be able to enjoy all of this?
You know, Eric, you've got to understand that when you live on top of the pyramid of needs, you know, Maslow was a philosopher that set up a pyramid of needs. When you live at the bottom of the pyramid of needs, where you're comfortable, where you've got your family around you, where you can buy the car and the house that you want, and you can earn money, that is the basics of life, the bottom of the pyramid. And as soon as you
food, shelter, all of
food,
that, yes.
shelter, and all of that. So the moment you move away from those things, you start understanding that those things, they don't count anymore in your life now. What counts is to stay alive. What counts is to survive. And that is when there's not one moment that you feel bored. You feel alive inside yourself, because ultimately on top of the pyramid, you need to survive. And if you put yourself into that circumstance and that situation, that is when people get to know themselves very well. In normal life, you don't get to know your capabilities very well because everything is in a controlled environment. And as soon as you remove that controlled environment, then you start feeling alive. And there's no boredom. There's that constant fight of survival, that intelligence that you need to understand where's the ice drifting to, because it's taking me away from where I want to be. How much must I walk? How can I conserve energy? How long does it take to pitch a tent? Because if it's going to take 1 minute longer, I'm going to lose my life. And each minute that you're actually walking, you've got to know that you're walking in the right direction. So just concentrating on navigation where your compass doesn't work, where your GPS freezes, the crystal liquid freezes, you need constantly to be connected to all the elements that will give you information to go where you want to be. So boredom is not a word that we use at all. It is every second of the day you're going into the unknown. And that's the word we use, is excitement. Excitement is what we experience. That's why we're there. If it was boredom, we wouldn't never be there. And then in life, you can't always be motivated to go and get out of the tent. There's a lack of motivation. And that lack of motivation gets replaced by discipline. And if you understand what real discipline in life means, waking up when you're fatigued, walking when you're hungry, pulling that sled when you're weak, and keep on believing that it's possible, because if the moment you stop believing it's possible, then you die, then you've got no option. And if you have no option in life, you cannot be bored.
And I believe this also makes it even more clear what you said before, that for you it's not about, as some observers might think, going out there in order to make it more likely to die, but for you it's in order to make it more likely to live or to feel alive by stripping away many of the things that in civilization, in our life today, make it harder for you to really feel this strong connection to yourself and to our elements that surround us.
Yeah, that's very true. You know, Eric, in my life as an explorer, and doing what I love doing allowed me to meet a lot of people. And I've never met a strong person that had an easy life. And it's not a criticism. It's just that to really know yourself, you have to be able to put yourself in a situation that you've never been in before. And if life is just too easy, I think sometimes you miss more than half of your life, because you not really know what you're capable of. Because if you're constantly living without fear, if you're constantly doing the things that you love, and you avoid the things that you don't love doing, you're not living life to the fullest. And in the job that I do in exploration, you've got to start loving the things that you hate doing. and it just means that, in fact, that allows you to know how you will react when you have to do things that nobody else wants to do.
What was it for you that sparked your fascination with expeditions and for adventure and for faraway places?
I think as a kid, I was brought up with a very open mind and a lot of freedom. And I believe that we all have different talents. And, some people become amazing bankers. Some people become amazing scientists, musicians, writers, engineers. And I always loved the outdoors. I always wanted to see what was on the other side of the mountain. And I think that hunger for the unknown becomes the driving force behind what we do. And once you get to know yourself a little bit more and you broaden your spectrum of knowledge, that is the moment where you can go out there and go into the unknown, because you're not afraid of dying. You want to learn how to survive. And that is extraordinary. If you look at any sportsman, any amazing scientist, any engineer that did amazing buildings, there was a moment that they had to go beyond what they know. And that moment is what makes the difference between ordinary and extraordinary. And you can choose those things in life. There's two lives that you can live. There's one life that you walk very close to the cliff, and the moment you make the mistake, you die. Or you can walk far away from the cliff, and you can make many mistakes because you're not going to fall down the cliff. But the view at the cliff is much better. The view that you have of life overall is worth it. If you walk far away from the cliff, you've got no view. You live a daily life. You exist. And that life can be interesting. But I prefer, honestly, living on the cliff and making it as safe as possible where I'm living, because the view is much better.
When did you start to consciously decide to live closer to the cliff?
I think when I was 8 years old, when my father gave me my first bicycle, and with one rule that at 6 o'clock at night I have to be at home. He didn't want to know where I went. I came back at 6 o'clock and always told him where I was and what I did. And it is not a father that said, don't do this, don't do that. All he said was, the same way that you leave home, you have to come back. That meant, don't injure yourself. Don't take unnecessary risks. Be conscious about the decisions and the things that you want to do. And that teaches you a responsibility from a very young age. And yes, we do make mistakes, but the mistakes was made by me. And I didn't have to be told that, driving without your hands with a bicycle is going to be dangerous. I had to discover that. And the moment that you discover your mistakes and the things that you do right in life is the moment that you learn. And that learning process can only be done by you. So at 8 years old, yes, when I was given a bike, and I had to be at home at 6 o'clock, and my father was there to listen to me when I came back, and I told him what I did, and then he educated me in a way to say, try this, maybe that works better, or don't jump into the river when it's a thunderstorm because the water's going to go higher. That was helping me to understand what was happening around me. So he had two brothers, a brother that lived 10 kilometers away from him and a brother that lived 300 kilometers away from him. And when I told him I was going to visit my cousins, the kids of his two brothers, he said, okay, yeah, you can go. But I didn't tell him which one I was going to visit. For me, it wasn't interesting to drive 10 kilometers or to cycle 10 kilometers to go and visit my cousins close by. I thought at 8 years old, I can cycle 300 kilometers. And not a lot of people, even at an age of that I am at 55, cycles 300 kilometers. You have to think a little bit about it. And I thought about it and I knew it's going to take time, but I didn't give all the information to my father. I only told him half the truth because I was afraid that he wouldn't allow me to go. So the mindset was there, that mindset of going beyond, going to explore, but I didn't want to be limited. And when 6 o'clock arrived and I wasn't at home, he called his brother that was 10 kilometers away and said, was Mike there today? No, Mike wasn't here. And he knew that I was trying to go to the other uncle because I told him so. So he jumped in his car, he got me along the road, and I was 8 years old. The little bicycle only maybe did 20 kilometers, never 300 kilometers. And he came to me and he said, okay, why didn't you tell me that you wanted to go and visit your cousins that's 300 kilometers away? And I told him that it's because I was afraid you wouldn't allow me. And he said, did I ever tell you not to do things? I'm here for you to learn from me. And the next weekend we did the 300 kilometers, but with him. And that is how you create this mind of an explorer that allows us to go out there and believe that everything is possible.
And that in turn, throughout many steps, of course, led to your very first real, bigger expedition in 1997, when you traversed South America, the whole South American continent, along the Amazon River, from its source all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. How did you come up with that concept? And once you did, what fascinated you about that idea?
You know, as a kid growing up in South Africa around animals and being a lot in the wild, I read quite a lot. And I was a kid that was lucky to be able to have parents that educated me through books. So
what did you like to read?
It was all explorers. I knew everything about polar explorers from Scott and Edmondson and Nansen to Shackleton to Captain Cook sailing around the world. And I read a lot about South America because imagine you're a kid and they speak about snakes that's 12 meters long, piranhas that can eat you, little frogs that can kill you, places in the jungle that the sun has never penetrated and touched the ground because of the density of the trees. That fascinated me, and that always stayed in my mind. So when I had the first opportunity to go, and I came from the South African Special Forces as well, so I knew what survival was all about. I joined the Special Forces in Brazil. And in Brazil, the Special Forces taught the Americans for the war in Vietnam. Okay, the Americans, didn't win the war in Vietnam simply because they weren't fighting where they wanted to fight. They had no real idea why they were there. But those guys were trained by the SIGs. The SIGs, they are at Manaus, the Brazilian Special Forces, and I went there. Arrived at the SIGs, and they taught me everything they could teach me on survival. So once I had that knowledge, I knew that I was capable of swimming 7,000 kilometers because I tried a little bit while I was living in Manaus in Brazil. So I've got the knowledge.
You just mentioned that in passing, but yes, indeed, you swam 7,000 kilometers almost in this expedition. That is remarkable.
And that took me 6 months. So the moment you can prepare yourself very well and then jump into the unknown with the amount of knowledge that you need, that is the moment when, two things become possible. What you have to understand is that there's so much information today, and we've got to be able to find the right information that suits us. So I looked at a book of snakes when I was in Manaus, and they were teaching me on what to do when you're bitten by a snake, how to identify snakes that's dangerous, how to identify snakes that's not dangerous. And the book was about this thick on everything that could kill you and everything that couldn't kill you. And I started tearing out the pages of the things that couldn't kill me. Because why should I know they can't kill me? They can't stop me. And start focusing on what could stop me. And that is when you start specializing on what you need to know to be able to survive what you want to do. And that preparation phase is important. If I didn't identify a snake, I knew that snake couldn't harm me. If I identified a snake that's in my memory, yes, that one I've got to be careful of. Everything the monkey eats, I can eat. So I know that if I look up in the tree and I'm hungry and I haven't found food, I can observe what the monkeys eat and I can climb up the tree and eat the same as the monkey. I'll survive. And if the monkey's up in the tree and the monkey doesn't eat anything, I can always eat the monkey. And that is basic survival instincts, that it is so logical. But we pollute our brain with information that is not necessary to know. And the moment you pollute your mind with unnecessary information, that is when things become impossible, because you want to answer all your questions before you actually go out there. And it's impossible to answer all your questions. You need to know 5% of the answers, and the rest of the questions you have, you will learn along the way. And that is when exploration becomes amazing. The possibility to always grow and always learn as you go along. In the start, we always say, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think I can do it. When you reach the other side of the jungle that took me 6 months, I knew that I didn't know enough to do it again. So the fact that although I've survived it, if I have to do it again with the knowledge that I have today, maybe it wouldn't be possible. And that is in life for everybody the same. Once you've achieved something, you're driven by your mental and your physical strength, knowledge and equipment, the people that support you. But at the end of the day, if you have to do things like that twice, that's when you have the knowledge to say, whoa, that's crazy. I can't do it again.
Yes, it's this mixture of being ready, preparing really in a really detailed fashion, really seriously, but also being, of course, flexible to expect the unexpected. And I believe if people think about explorers or adventurers, they always think these adventurers, they set out almost purposefully without a plan to make mishaps more likely. But actually the opposite is true, right? You, as you said before, with regard to the cliff, you want to be close to the cliff, but also you try to prepare as well as possible to make sure that hopefully you don't fall off the cliff, and hopefully you keep control as long as possible.
And that's life in general, Eric, in any field. It's to make your life as interesting as possible. We have about 30,000 days in one lifetime. That's average life to 82 years old. Half of that 30,000 days we asleep. So, in fact, you've got 15,000 days to be able to do everything that you want to do in life. And we can't waste that time. We can't sit there and wonder what we want to do in life. We've just got to do things. And the more things you do, the more things becomes possible to do. The less you do, the less things becomes possible to do. And that's the dynamic of life. Life is, I often compare it with water. When you put water in a pond and there's no fresh water arriving in that pond, what happens with that water? It loses its life. It starts rotting. It smells. So you've got to put movement in that water to be able to put oxygen in it, to be able to be drinkable again. And that's a life. If you don't move, you rot and you smell.
And you don't have that much time to move either, right? I mean, you mentioned the 15,000 days, but that includes some years as a baby where you cannot really self-realize yourself all that much. It includes, hopefully, some years when you are old and also your opportunities are more limited than before. So the time frame in our life that actually allow us to have this movement and this potential for growth, it's quite limited. So we should really try to make a conscious effort to use it well.
I think we sometimes take life very lightly, and we focus on things that should have less importance in our life, and we forget about living in the moment present. We always kind of think that the past was better than what it really was, and that's normal to think like that. And the future is going to be worse as you get older. But in fact, you forget that you've got to live in the moment present. And the moment present allows you to prepare, to be able to do things that will make your life exciting. And when you start living too much in the past, then you're not living into the future. And the life is something that you've got to learn from the past, not to make the same mistakes in the future, and that you see the future as bright. If you want to see looking down, it's dark. If you want to just lift your head and see the light, that's when things becomes possible. So we are such a big indicator on the life that we live. If you start criticizing other people's lives, it's because actually you're criticizing a little bit your own life. If you're not happy in what you do, you've got to change something. There's some actions that you need to take in your life to be able to fulfill this 15,000 days to the best of your capabilities. Yes, I've lost people in lives. Yes, I lost my wife. Yes, people died around me. Yes, I had to cut off my own fingers in the tent. But that hardship that I go through is very little to pay for what life has brought into our family and into my life. So if you can learn from that and share it with other people to inspire them to go out there and live an exciting life, then you should do it. Inspiration is so important in life.
When talking about the ability to change and when talking about looking into our own past and worrying about the future, I'm thinking of a psychology study that I read quite a while ago, which also interestingly points out that we tend to, when we look into our own past, we see the growth that we had. We see all the changes that we went through, the courage that it sometimes took, and we can see these developments quite clearly. Sometimes we might regret it, sometimes we might not. But if we look into the future, we tend to always underestimate our opportunity and our ability to continue to grow. That's quite interesting. It's very well explained in the study that we always feel that to a certain extent, we are at the present moment, whenever that is, more or less at the end of our development. So the challenge is to see the developments that we have been going through and to understand that 1 year, 5 years, 10 years potentially can lead to a completely different life, especially if we are not happy with how things are going right now.
I think, Eric, that's resumed perfectly. I was taught to dream big in my life, not to limit myself from what I knew on the moment present, but to have a broad vision of life. So if your dreams don't scare you, they're too small. I still wake up at my age today and I get excited about what I want to do. But at the same time, it creates fear. So if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. And what we need in life, we need a catalyst, somebody to say, yes, it's possible. And that's when you make the first step. If you don't have that person that tells you, yes, it's possible, then tell yourself it's possible. And that is the moment that you say, okay, if people try and hold me down and drag me down, I need to get rid of these people. I need people to push me up. I need people to believe in me. But first, you have to believe in yourself. Then people can believe in you. And if you think of life, how many times have you been told that, no, it's not possible, or maybe that's not a good idea? There's no good or bad ideas. All ideas can teach you something in life. And we should stop doing good on one side and bad on the other side. We should combine these good and bad because they experiences that makes you grow. And the more failures you have, like I've had in my life, the more I learn about myself not to make the same mistake twice. And often we keep on making the same mistakes because we're not conscious of the moment that it should teach us something.
Well, we talked about your adventures in the Amazon. We should mention you did that with a so-called hydro speed, which is a little tool that helps you to move ahead, but also meant that you were like half your body was still in the water most of the time. It was a big and a very challenging expedition. You, of course, did many more that we don't have the time to go through them right now. You circumnavigated the globe around the equator. You did many, many things. But I believe one of the red threads that you can see combining or linking all these adventures from the Amazon to the ice of the Arctic and Antarctica that we talked about, but also up to high altitudes. You are also quite a serious mountain climber, K2 and all of that. One of the linking elements is what you just mentioned, probably dream big. So the urge and the willingness to always look for new challenges and also new opportunities to express yourself through mastering, hopefully, these challenges. And sometimes also not mastering them. Sometimes, failing in quotation marks. What does failure mean to you? Which kind of role does that word play when you look back and also when you look ahead with regard to your expeditions?
You know, it's how do you define failure? Mm-hmm. Where if I climb a mountain and I don't get to the summit, it's seen as failure because you had to turn back. But if failure becomes beautiful and accepted by you, and you can go back and do things again and try again, it's not failure, it's life. And everything that we do in life that might be seen as failure is experiences lived. And all experiences build your life. Those are the building bricks of your life, is what you've experienced and what you've done. So the moment that failure plays a part in your life, that's the moment that your foundation becomes so solid. Because there's a moment that success leads to success until it can't support the structure of success anymore. and then you fail. So you fail from very high and you fall very low. And resilience is something that comes to mind in failure. Is how fast do you rise after a fall? If you know how to deal with failure, it means the moment you've fallen, the moment you failed, might be seen as failure by others, but it might not be failure for yourself. And inside yourself, all failures must be seen as success. If you were stupid and you make 3 times the same mistakes, then you've got to learn. You've got to be able to say, okay, now I understand that's failure. And the people, when they criticize you or whatever they say, we told you so, they might be right. And failure to me, even climbing mountains, or the first time I tried to go to the North Pole, 5 days from the North Pole, I have to turn back because I frozen my fingers. I took my gloves off. I made the mistake. The moment you accept the mistake that you make, the quicker you accept that mistake, the quicker you can deal with failure. And failure is not just something you must put on a shelf and hide away from it. Speak about your failure. Communicate it. Tell people what you learned from it, because it might be something that you don't like speaking about. And if you hide failure, you can't deal with it.
How do you make the decision when it is time to call it a day, to give up and to turn back? Because, I mean, you said you like to dream big, you like to live close to the cliff. When do you decide, okay, now we're getting too close? Because I believe after decades of adventure, yes, there is experience, a lot of experience, but there's also always the danger, at least theoretically, to forget about the real dangers that you're exposing yourself to. Learn to accept dangers as part of everyday life and to not take them seriously enough anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question, or a very good question that you've asked, because when do you know it's time to turn back? Mm-hmm. For K2 last year, for example, when we went up to K2 and at 200 meters from the summit, we decide to turn back because we feel that the snow is not strong enough to hold our weight and it might avalanche down. So technically, I know that I might die if I try. But we've got this fever, which we call summit fever. The summit fever is a psychological acceptance where you say, now I'm willing to take all this risk and doesn't matter if I die. For me, in everything that I've done, my life matters to me and for the people that support me. And because that I put on the list of priority number 1, come back alive, even though it means failure, is the first reflection on making decisions. Now, what happens when you don't listen to yourself? And in 2015, when we went to K2, we had a friend climbing behind us, and we decided to turn back. And when we crossed them going down, a friend of mine and his son, he asked us, why are you going down? And I said, I don't feel right. I feel uncomfortable. So that feeling that we have with the connection you have with nature is important to listen to. And not only listen to the egocentric needs of human beings. So he said, he thinks it's okay, I'm going up. I want to be the first father-son expedition on the summit of a mountain. And then they died 6 hours later. To me, that is permanent failure because you can't try again.
No.
For the fact that I turned back was seen as failure, but it was beautiful for me because the summit I always said will be the moment I turn back, not physically the summit on top of the mountain, but the moment that I turn back and I come back alive.